We'll give it. All right, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, thanks everyone for joining this evening. Really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule here to join with us. We've got myself and Rick Ansel here, like we did in January, and we've got Eric Christensen working the slides for us behind the scenes. So, Eric, can you go to the next slide? Excellent, thank you. So just to introduce myself, I am Douglas Rotunda. I am the president of the KMPUD Board of Directors, and I am a volunteer firefighter for the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. And I am joined tonight by the KMPD Assistant General Manager and our fire chief for KVFD, Rick Ansel. So, Rick, do you want to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Yeah, welcome everybody, and I'm glad to see so many attending tonight.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's go to the next slide, Eric. So our main objectives for tonight are to go over a few things. Just again to review the KVFD challenges and operations that we have today. We'll talk about the 218 benefit assessment that was covered at the February 7th KMT board meeting. We'll have a community Q&A, and I'll start that Q&A with Ricky Newberry. He is the general manager of Kirkwood Mountain Resort, and I invited him here this evening to give his perspective directly. And I know that the community is really interested in his thoughts and opinions on things. So we wanted to make sure he had a space to speak tonight. And then we'll just have questions and answers available as well. We thought the format that we used last time was really effective. We were able to get through many questions, many more questions that we could if we took them live. And so we've enabled the chat functionality in the Q&A functionality, I should say, so that people can write their questions over the course of the conversation this evening. And Eric will be able to try to answer them as we're talking. And then the ones that are still left at the end, we can go through as well. So just please make sure you use the Q&A feature if you have questions there. And then at the end, we'll talk about the roadmap of what we're doing and what can come next. And so before we get into everything in more detail, I wanted to just say that we have done a lot of work here as a KMPD board. We'll talk about the roadmap in detail here, but I just want to say that before, we are cognizant that what we've talked about with the 218 benefit assessment and the options that we're providing are potentially going to result in higher costs to the Kirkwood community. And we don't take that request lightly. We know that increasing the cost of ownership is really important. But our reality is that the status quo that we have today is not going to last. And we have to do something, and we have to make a decision how to proceed on this topic. So I just want to say that we recognize this and we understand this, and we're trying to be cognizant of that as we go through our recent history here and what we've done to try to think about these things. So again, I just wanted to say at a high level, we appreciate all being here. I see, pushing over 50 people here now joining, and I'm really glad to see everyone on the call to join in the conversation. In terms of what we've done as a recent history, and I know if you joined in January and you've heard some of this again, but I think it's important because we have new people joining the conversation all the time to review kind of the history here. This has been going on for actually a long time. The conversation goes well beyond 2023, but in our recent history, we did a Measure E, which was a special tax presented to the community looking to raise money to fund KVFD. It was based on a parking space benefit or allocation. And that failed in July 2023. And since then, the board took steps to better understand the level of service that people want, how to fund it, and where to go forward. In doing so, we formed a temporary advisory committee that I had the pleasure of chairing. That ran from September to about February 2024. And we did a lot of events there, and there are lots of members of the community in that temporary advisory committee, including those from Kirkwood Mountain Resort. People who were for Measure E, those who were opposed to Measure E. We had volunteer firefighters. And so we had a really good set of people thinking about the topic and getting the community feedback. And what we heard from that as a temporary advisory committee was that the community wanted more specific costs on operational models in terms of feasibility, what could work and what couldn't work, and also the benefit assessment in particular about how to allocate these costs. And really to make sure that we were moving at a pace that made sure everyone was, everything was transparent and communicated as best we could. And so we are trying to do that. And so when the temporary advisory committee finished its work, that's when the work of the KMPD staff really started, because as it says here in March 2024, they started exploring the organizational staffing and funding options available to us. We hired a 218 consultant in order to give that professional benefits assessment perspective. And we're trying to go through this step by step. And so what has happened over 2024, calendar year 2024, more or less, was staff has been working on getting this information. And so starting in December, things really started picking up. Chief Withrow from Amador Fire Protection District came forward, where we then heard in January the specifics of a proposal for Amador Fire Protection District to service Kirkwood. And then we had a community forum on January 23rd. On February 7th, we had a consultant present the best benefits assessment methodology, and here we are again today. And we'll talk about what's going to go happen next after this, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that we have been trying to take the feedback from Measure E, and given the constraints that we have, giving the understanding of our situation as best we can, we're really trying to provide the community with the information and get your feedback and understand what people want and what they don't want and how to proceed. And this is that time. And so now we have these pieces of information to move forward. Rick, did I miss anything? Does that pretty good coverage, you think?
Excellent job, Doug. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to hand it to Rick now to cover over the operational challenges, go through the 218 benefit assessment, and then we'll again come back to some FAQs that we've received. So we'll have some slides that I'll talk through, and then we'll have Ricky present and go to the more general Q&A at that point. So go ahead, Rick.
So as I mentioned in some of the previous meetings, there are really three operational challenges that the volunteer fire department has now. And the number one is volunteer firefighter staffing. We are all volunteer. There is no paid employees on the fire department, including myself as the chief, as you probably are aware. And there's also no succession options for the current structure that we have. There's no one that's able to just slide in and replace me if I decide to leave the department. And unfortunately, our department is all hazards. So maybe that's not unfortunate, but we respond to all types of emergencies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 12 months out of the year. And so with the volunteers that I have, which are, excellent community members, as well as people that drive from outside the area to come volunteer for the department, it's just not sustainable enough to continue on. Over the years, I've trained probably over 300 volunteers who've been interested, but unfortunately, there's just not enough people that live in the Kirkwood area that are able to come and volunteer. Another challenge that we have is with training. There's certainly, as you probably heard before, numerous hours that are required to become a firefighter, but in the years past, a volunteer firefighter wasn't asked to do so much. Now they're asked to do everything. And so the state said, hey, we no longer have a volunteer firefighter certification. You're going to be considered as a firefighter one, and you need to meet those standards. And those standards are extreme. And that's just for firefighting. And then you have wildland firefighting, and of course, the EMS skills, which could include EMT skills, up to paramedic. And so, again, we do the best we can in-house. We tap on outside agencies for support, and we send volunteers to training when we can. And we also have a stipend program through our KVFD 501c3 to help volunteers pay for training outside the area. In fact, this has been pretty beneficial for us. We've had 2 or 3 EMTs who just recently completed the courses and basically are on our ranks now. So we appreciate that. But again, all these challenges of training makes it really tough to continue with a viable fire department that's going to be able to respond quickly, efficiently, as well as perform proficiently during an emergency. And then finally, the last challenge we have has been financial, as you know. And this is really why we're here today. We've got a fire assessment that was created in 1987. It does supply some revenue to the department. We have agreements with outside agencies to give us a little bit as well when we respond to calls, for example, in Amador County. But other than fundraising, there's really no source of revenue for the fire department. And so we rely on property taxes to cover our costs. And unfortunately, we still need grants and loans from the 501c3 to cover stipends to encourage people to volunteer for the fire department. So again, these are our 3 operational challenges. I've talked about them before, but we're at a critical point now where the status quo is no longer an option for us. Eric, if you'd like to hit the next slide. Thank you. So for the past several years, and I'll highlight this a little bit because I know Doug will talk about this later on as well. We've done everything we could think of to try to create more revenue for the fire department. This included numerous discussions with the counties to see if we can increase the property taxes that we receive from the counties. It's approximately $600,000 a year that we share with water and wastewater departments for the district. We do receive a TOT. It's about $20,000 a year of TOT tax. Is there a way that the counties could give us more? And we've explored increasing the cost for mutual aid with, like, for example, the agreement, as I mentioned before, with the Amateur Fire Protection District, and they have recently increased it for us. There's been discussions about charging for false alarms and inspections, and those are ongoing, but you really need a paid staff to manage that and to properly administer a program where you're going to start charging for nuisance alarms, for example, or repeat inspections on facilities. We do have a contract with Fire Recovery USA to try to recoup some of the costs that we spend out on Highway 88. So, for example, it's a vehicle accident, we could bill the parties involved for our services. But again, this requires proficient staffing to get the information to follow up and to make sure that the billing's done correctly to try to get billing. We continue to seek grants. There are, as you may be familiar with, federal grants, and we've received a couple in the past for SCBAs as well as fire trucks or fire apparatuses. We annually seek the CAL FIRE 50/50 grant. Basically, it's a personal protective equipment grant, and it's a way for us to kind of offset the cost for our operations. And then finally, the other thing we kind of considered was, the G&A allocations for the different departments of the district. Could water and wastewater give up some of the property tax we use in those departments toward fire? And as you may recall, back in 2023, when we had the survey, that 2/3 of the community who responded said, we really don't want you to touch the other utilities to pay for fire. But again, that's something that could be considered moving forward. The other thing we've done is for staffing. And for staffing, we took a look at the internal, what would it take to create our own fire department that could provide the services that we do now at a better, more proficient, skilled level. And we went to our insurance company and they said, yeah, you can certainly do that. It's going to increase some of your costs, but you could do that. But what about your retirement? Currently, you are CalPERS water retirement system. You really have to be a safety retirement system, public safety retirement system under CalPERS to do this efficiently, or you have to create a CFD, another fire department, and do something completely different. Long story short, we went down that road. We did obtain what the cost would be to become an internal fire department through CalPERS. And then we took those costs along with competitive salary pay rates to create a paid fire department staff with minimum staffing. That's basically 2 firefighter EMTs and some type of supervision. Hopefully it's a chief or a captain. And looking at those costs, it was, it's well over $1.8, $1.9 million for us to create and have our own internal fire department. So it became cost prohibitive. We're trying to listen to what the community said. Hey, we want the service, but we want it at the lowest possible price. And so we reached out to other departments, which included CAL FIRE, the U.S. Forest Service. We also looked at other agencies like Lake Valley Fire Protection District, and even someone reached out to East Fork Fire in Nevada to see, hey, is there a way that you can provide staffing levels or services for our fire department so we can continue on? And out of them all, there were some limitations. For example, CAL FIRE, it's cost prohibitive. They would need to have increased facility. They would have increased facility requirements that we couldn't afford. Plus, they maintain a minimum staffing, which is typically 4 or more per company per station. And so again, thinking about costs and trying to keep costs down, it just wasn't really a cost-effective way of doing it. U.S. Forest Service does not provide the services that we would need 24/7 year round. And then, for example, Lake Valley Fire Protection District, it could be a good option. However, they are firefighter paramedics, and again, that's increasing the cost, and we're trying to reduce the cost and make it as cost effective as possible. And the only other department that we've actually went out, well, there were two other departments we went out to request proposals from. One was from Amador Fire Protection District, and they did provide a proposal, which is actually the cheapest one that you'll see here on this slide, as well as Eastern Alpine County, who have not yet given us a proposal, but they're in still discussions now to talk about maybe they could possibly provide some type of service. So ultimately, we went the lowest possible option, which was Amador Fire Protection District, and originally the cost they gave us were about 1.5. We were able to kind of whittle that down from December to January to about 1.2. And so, again, we're trying to be cost effective as well as provide a really good quality service 24/7 with at the minimum staffing levels. And that's where we are today.
Rick, before you move on, can I just
Yeah.
ask two things? So I want to highlight what Rick mentioned earlier, that the property taxes in this 1.2 that you're seeing are based off of our current allocations of property taxes. But as Rick mentioned, we had a survey where we asked the question around, could we allocate more? So the 1.2 that you're seeing here could become a smaller number if we decided to move in that direction with another approximately $300,000 more that we could allocate from water and wastewater into this to get this down, a little bit lower. So that's one thing I just want to put a point on because that's the number you're seeing here. And then Rick, I wonder if you could just dig in a little bit more because I know you touched on parts of it, but the internal option of going from, is there anything in between, um, you know, the staffing level that we looked at with the 1.9 in between that is viable for us to do, and in terms of how you looked at it and what you were thinking of?
Yeah, and we have considered, hey, what if we just continue with the model we have now with you have a paid fire chief and you have volunteers? And that really isn't, like I mentioned before, it's not sustainable, but fiduciary, it's we just don't have the money to do that as well. It's just not the responsible thing to do. Volunteers can only do what they can do unless they've been through a firefighting academy, an EMT course. The only training they're going to receive is what we can give them and maybe a little bit what they can get from the outside. And so it's just not a really good option. Further, running a fire department is just not just has hire a chief and have some volunteers show up. It's a chief. It's having a training officer, someone who's qualified and skilled to actually teach courses that are to the state standard. It's an EMS director. Someone can be the liaison between Mountain County's EMS and our department, as well as the counties, to ensure that we're administering and or providing medical services at the level that the counties require, as well as the state. And then further, for equipment, we currently rely on the district mechanic to help with the fire truck, but there are a lot of things, like you can imagine with any fire department, that have to be done to equipment to maintain them. There's pump tests, there's hose tests, there's ladder tests, there's um, SCBA requirements, and then we have an air compression system that has to be tested in. There's a lot more to just saying, hey, there's a chief here and he's doing some paperwork. There's a lot more than that one chief can do, myself, to really run a department efficiently and properly. So again, we've tried to think about different ways to continue the way we've been going, and it's not sustainable. It just doesn't work. And I don't want to have happen in the future that's happened in the last 12 months where there is no Kirkwood volunteer available to respond to a call. And we have to rely on outside agencies to come up and cover the district, the valley. And so that's why, again, why we're here today. So hopefully I answered
Yep.
your question, Doug.
Yep. No, thanks. Yeah, let's keep moving forward. I want to make sure I'm conscious of times that we can try to stay within around an hour here. And I want to make sure Ricky has time as well.
Great. So I'm going to cover the next few slides here. And this is just going to be a brief summary of what the PowerPoint slide deck that was presented in our last January board meeting by the district's consultants with Francisco and Associates. If you'd like to see the full presentation, you can find that at the district's website. And I should also note that I really can't speak for consultants, and I will not be able to really answer any specific questions about the engineering study, the specific methodology, or the responses for the comments and questions that came up during the presentation at that board meeting. But we anticipate on having the consultants return in March to present their engineering report to the board and answer any questions that may have come up between the January meeting and, of course, by the time they hit the next March board meeting, hopefully. So basically, you can read through the PowerPoints, but what we're doing is different from Measure E. It's called a Proposition 218. It's a special benefit for the property. And it's a general, and it's an assessment for the property itself. You technically can't do an assessment for general benefit, but there's a portion that you can. It's about 5%. So from what the consultants told us is that they established a well-known, or not well-known, but a methodology that's been commonly used and been tested, and is legally something that they can stand on to basically prepare the engineer's report for us to consider doing a Proposition 218 assessment for our community. And then there's a process with the 218 process, with the 218. It's there's required notices and ballots, and then scheduling for public hearings and so forth. And so that rest assured the district will follow those things if we decide to move forward. And whatever the engineer provides for us, we're also going to check with our district council to make sure that the 218 it's like a second set of eyes on the 218 engineer study and this whole thing to say, hey, yes, this is legally acceptable. And then finally, the voting for this 218 is a little different than the special tax that we tried before. It's basically a weighted 50+1 ballot for the assessment. So it's done a little bit differently. It's voted by the property owners, not by the voters. Here, we can go to the next slide. So they take a look at fire protection services that, again, benefit the properties in the service areas, which is in Kirkwood Valley. And then, as I mentioned before, minimal general benefit for the public at large, which is 5%. And we feel that the 5% general benefit at large is actually covered from the existing budget that we have for the fire department. So we feel like that this special tax could handle what the need is, basically approximately $1.2 million to cover the cost to have staffing for the fire department. And the special benefit methodology was based on land use type, building area, lot area, and demand placed on services. Next slide. The assessment is segregated in two components. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice, talking too much. There's a land component and a building component. And again, properties within the KMPD service area will be evaluated using the property data from Amador and Alpine and El Dorado counties. On average, 25% of the total property values within KMPD attributed to the land and 75% attributed to the improvements. 25% of the budget assigned to the land component and 75% assigned to the building component. Next slide. So their assessment methodology was, again, applied using a flat rate per lot square footage. And you can see down below that they assigned EDUs, which was something that's been used in other 218 studies and engineer assessments, which you can see down below, where a single family was per unit was 1, condominium 0.75, and so forth. And then you can go to the next slide. They also took into account commercial properties within the community boundaries, created essentially a higher demand for service during peak season. And this additional benefit factor is also applied to the commercial properties based on the energy use data provided by the district as follows. And you can see there they did a ratio for peak season, which was November through March. They established a baseline of 3.1 peak versus low season usage ratio. And then ultimately they considered making sure that peak to low ratio usage ratio for all properties when compared to the baseline yields. Additional benefit was a 2.3, which represents the impact commercial properties create during peak season due to the increased service population. You can go to the next slide. So the assessment rates, again, for residential parcels, they came up with the land component of 0.0068 per slot square foot. Building component, they came at 1240 per EDU. And again, these numbers are being looked at once more to make sure that they are correct and that the assessments that they're applying on everybody is fair and equal for the methodology that they used. And so you can see it also for commercial and office spaces, what we use for the land component, building component, and again, how they got to the total assessment. And what I was going to say before, and I got ahead of myself, but basically all the assessments were using the San Francisco Bay Area CPI for the month of April to establish basically an annual increase for the assessment, which is something we don't have now with our current assessment. And during the last board meeting, someone asked, well, why'd you use San Francisco? That's the highest one. Well, we did research behind the scenes, and Eric Christensen, general manager, determined after reviewing all the other CPIs near us that actually San Francisco was the lowest. So that's why we used it. And that's something that the district also uses for all their rate studies.
And there isn't, and I think there wasn't a CPI in like Sacramento, which was suggested as well, right? Like things like
Right,
that as well. So not just because it was the lowest, it was just also the one to use in some ways.
exactly. Okay, next slide. So these are examples of the assessment calculation that were presented again in January. And so you can see that, for example, for a average single family parcel, 18,000 square foot lot, plus the building component and the total assessment and so forth, it was like $1,362 a year. And then for commercial, using the same methodology, it was $4,136. Again, I'm just giving you a brief summary of the presentation. And if you want to get more details and listen to the consultant give his presentation, please refer back to the January board meeting, but this will certainly be discussed again, hopefully in March. And I just wanted to kind of give everybody kind of a snapshot of what happened then. And next slide, Eric.
Okay. So, look, thanks, Rick, for going through that. As you said, March 7th, we have our next board meeting. We'll have more conversation around this. I encourage you to have a look at the board meeting we had on February 7th. It was about an hour and a half, maybe, conversation with the consultant, give or take, where we had lots of really good questions from the community asking around the EDU settings, what does the land, just asking for clarifications and more information, CPI. And so we've asked the consultant to come back with more information on that. And so what they showed in February was their methodology and some preliminary thoughts. And then in March, we should be able to see hopefully their full engineering report. And so that's where we are. Again, just to summarize everything, right? Rick gave an overview of a lot of the things that we've looked at. And so where we are today is looking at an opportunity from Amador Fire Protection to give us a professional service of EMT firefighters at a cost at $1.5 million, more or less, with some amount of property taxes that we can allocate to lower that down. But the reason that we are talking about the 218 is that we don't have the money to cover the rest of that balance. And so the assessment that Rick just went through is some number, less than $1.5 million would be potentially what the board would ask you all to vote on, is whether you would take an assessment in the proportions that Rick just talked through that the engineer provided to us. So that's a summary of where we are. Rick, does that make sense? Anything else that you want to add on that? Is that good?
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's talk about some FAQs here that we get, and then I'll hand it over to Ricky. So I've seen it just popping up, and I know Eric has answered some of it. So there are a lot of questions that we get around property taxes and the transient occupancy tax, or TOT, that you'll hear about potentially as an acronym, TOD or TOT. Um, We've asked, not me personally, I will, but I will say, in the recent history of what we've talked about, we've talked, like I've talked to supervisors, I've talked to people, not me personally, today, but in the very recent history, we've had lots of conversations, and I know staff has had lots of conversations on what can we do to have more property taxes, and so. And before I got joined with the KMPD, we had a previous board president I know work on trying to get legal ways to talk about this and asking for counties to give us more money back to us in the community. And they've declined to do so. And it comes from a formula from 1985 that they are not required legally to give us more property taxes. And so we ask, and we do not get more back from them. And with what the KMPUD has been trying to do and what we have available is what you're seeing here in this conversation. And so what I wanted, I will continue to push on this coming in as the board president. Recently in the last month to have these conversations with supervisors and and ask them about this as well. But the response that we get is that they're not under an obligation to give us any more TOT or from property taxes themselves. And right now we get about $20,000 a year, I believe, Rick, from the TOT from Alpine County, and we do not get any from Amador County. So that's the reality of where we are on property taxes. And I know, again, that's a lot of questions that we get about, can we increase that value? And I think everyone here would like that. But that is where we are. And that's what the conversation has been for as long as I've heard people talk about it before I became a part of this community. Rick, anything else on that you'd like to add?
No, I think that was a good summary.
Okay. We also get asked about service area and how that relates to what we do here. So what is the KVFD service area? So it's really the Kirkwood Valley and then basically a little bit across the highway, Kirkwood Inn area across the street. Do we respond outside the Kirkwood area? Yes, we do. We go out towards Carson Pass, Woods Lake. We go out towards Tragedy Springs over the Carson Spur. And so, that is what we do. And we have mutual aid with our neighboring districts of Eastern Alpine and Amador Fire Protection District. And Eric, if you want to go to the next slide, the question would be like, well, can we get more money from those departments for that mutual aid? And, we've talked about that, but I want to highlight, and I think, Rick has mentioned to me in the past about the benefits that we get from this partnership do outweigh a lot of that potential benefit in a lot of ways. For example, we have a 911 dispatch center that we get paid for, and we get ALS care coming to Kirkwood as a mutual aid from these partners that we work with. So, it's not like we're not getting anything already from having that partnership and that mutual aid. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And next question is, can we charge, residences or businesses outside of our service area? And the answer is no, we can't. In terms of why can't we do what Bear Valley does? They're also in Alpine County. As Rick mentioned, we've gotten a proposal from Alpine County. None has been received yet. They have public service officers, so that's law enforcement and fire. So law enforcement is my understanding that they're paid for their county taxes, and the fire is they have a 218 assessment that they pay themselves for the fire component of those people. Because that's a different kind of structure, we would have to go through another process for 218 to do something like that, to have what would be similar to them, which would be law and fire. So that would be another process that we can consider for sure. Why can't we do what we've done before? I think Rick has talked about this, we've try to mention this as much as we can. The status quo is just not an option, whether it's from the lack of volunteers, particularly having a fire chief, that is just not, like, that just won't happen. We just can't persist like this. We do have state mandated requirements that could potentially expose us to liability, that we're trying to make sure that we have our requirements up to date, and the training that we need to have requirements to our volunteers there. And then certainly the funding that I said, regardless of what path we were going to go down, we don't have funding right now to even operation like the current KVFD as it is for much longer. So those are all reasons why the status quo is not going to persist. And we will have a change in one way or another. Eric, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so then ISO ratings, this comes back with insurance. So if we had a paid fire department, it may improve an ISO rating, but if we divest the department, we would possibly become worse. Um, what about emergency medical services and keeping a fire department, or even having emergency medical services and no fire department? Um, that is possible. We can investigate that. That is, if we had a volunteer fire department, everything I just said would still be true of the challenges that we have there. So EMS and fire emergency services from fire engines are different things. And so again, we could have a 218, we could go down an emergency services route and have no fire department. That is a possibility that we could explore. But it would take it's a new different benefits assessment and a process, and having someone who would want to service us in that way. We have the Barton Clinic here. A lot of gratitude to Kirkwood Mountain Resort and Ricky and his team for providing that to the community. It is not currently a receiving facility that the KVFD can transport people to. I know that's been in conversations, and Ricky's thoughtful to that, and I have a lot of gratitude to him for that. But as it states right now, that's only open during the resort hours, and they're not a receiving facility in the exact way that you might expect, like a KVFD be able to take people there. So that is, that's a great service to have here in the community, but it's not exactly tied to the KVFD as you'd expect. And so, tying all this up a little bit here in terms of, again, lots of questions around property taxes. Why can't we get more the TOT? The only real solution, as I understand it, is if you wanted to incorporate us Kirkwood into a city, that's when we would have more control over all of this money, right? We would be able to have this. And if you want to provide feedback about getting us more property taxes or getting more TOT, you can reach out to your county representative. So that's Jeff Brown in Amador and Terry Woodrow in Alpine counties. And, that's one possibility, or just, the community could lead us towards an incorporation event. And that would be where that would need to go as a community-driven effort. But I will say, just in conversations of that, because that's been explored in the past, there are other components of it too. It's not just a net gain of property taxes. There are requirements that we would then have that we do not have today in terms of services that we would need to provide and things like that. So, it's just something that my belief that was explored before I joined the community in my current capacity, but it's something that we could potentially revisit from a community perspective. Okay, Rick, did I miss anything? Anything I want to cover on this?
No, it was a good summary. I think
Okay.
we really try to answer the questions that people were asking the last month or so since the last board meeting, and actually the last forum meeting. So that was a nice summary. And as always, if you have other questions, please email the district or myself or any of the board members. We definitely want to try to answer them for you.
Yeah. Like I said, I know the property taxes and TOT are high on people's minds, and so I will personally keep pushing on that and ask those questions. But I think people have to be understanding in that this has happened long before I joined this community, and many people have asked these questions, and we haven't made the progress that I think everyone wants the answer to be. And I know that's a disappointing answer to give, but that's our reality. And so we're trying to work within those bounds right now with the proposals that you've seen and giving you the most cost-effective structure that we can and a proposal for it. So that's at a high level where we are. And now let me give the floor to Ricky. Welcome, Ricky. Thanks for taking the time this evening to join. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
That's good. Eric, I don't know if you want to allow my video. Says the host won't start video, so there we go. Thanks. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. Ricky Newberry, General Manager here at Kirkwood Mountain Resort. Thanks, everybody, for the time tonight. I think as many of you know who know my story, I've been deeply involved with Kirkwood since coming here in 1999, when my wife, Maggie, took the job as a school teacher at Kirkwood Meadows Elementary, and I started working here as a ski patroller. I thought it'd be for a year, and 26 years later, here I am. And I love this place. And because of my love for this place, my team and I are truly committed to working with Doug, Rick, and the KMPUD board to find a solution that addresses our community EMS and fire safety needs for the long term. So thanks for advancing to that second slide there, Eric. Here's what I'd like to cover today. No, go back. Slide 2. Thanks very much. There we go. I'm not driving. Process for identifying a solution here, how we've engaged with Doug and the subcommittee since the start, what we see in the survey results from the community, what questions we remain with, what we like to see as next steps, and what we think the ideal state would be for discussion. Okay, next slide. Thank you. All right. All right, for community engagement, I want to call out that this process has been going on since before I came back in this role as the GM, and that we've been involved with our team since the beginning and really appreciate the opportunity to contribute. I think despite the community engagement, the current KMPUD proposal doesn't seem to align with the findings of the working group that we were part of or the results that we saw in the community survey. Looking at the KMPUD community survey, it shows that over 66% of the respondents feel positive or very positive about the current services provided by the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. So this leads us to believe that the community may not agree that the current Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department model isn't working for the community's current needs. That being said, we agree that there's always room for improvement. Myself and the senior leadership team at Kirkwood are fully committed to supporting the board and working alongside the community to find a solution. For a little context, that process of identifying a solution started very collaboratively. A community working group started a while back, which included members of Kirkwood Mountain Resort, and worked together on issues such as this before disbanding a year ago. We did the community survey in March of 2024. And we feel the working group was disbanded before the group was able to provide informed feedback and recommended next steps. So how did Kirkwood Mountain Resort engage? We had Dan Deemer, who's on the call with us here tonight, our base op senior manager, and he was hand in hand with Doug in this process until a year ago. Kirkwood Mountain Resort leadership, including myself, we've attended the public discussions from the December 2023 community forum that we hosted here in Red Cliffs to now. So we're active and we're paying attention and want to know what the community wants in the community. Can we go to next slide, please? So as we look at the survey results, there is support for funding and supporting both EMS and fire services. The survey and discussion address both. Yet the current proposal only addresses fire through the 218 process, which fails to address the concerns raised in the survey. Only about 5% of the people that responded to the survey indicated that they wanted a professional level of service as proposed. Because of this, we'd love to see other options discussed and are very willing to talk through these. Can we go to the next slide, Eric? How do we move forward from here? And what services do we support? Being a patroller for the bulk of my career, working with an ALS, Advanced Life Support Clinic, through a few different entities, most recently Barton, also working through a time where we didn't have ALS care here during the height of our operation. I'm a big fan of ALS level care to provide advanced airways and pain management, what I think we need in our remote location. We realize that the current Prop 218 conversation can't consider EMS, but we'd like to include that regardless as we consider this to be a critical need in the community. I think we need more discussions around moving other funding sources to pay for fire, and if we can do this for the EMS similarly. I am a fan of a full-time paid professional career fire chief under a multi-year contract. I think through that leadership, we can develop a robust volunteer program that includes training. We are certainly open to paid engineers and firefighters depending on the structure. Having lived through Caldor and evacuation myself and seen what happened here in Sierra Tahoe and Heavenly, I'm a fan of fire prevention and risk mitigation. And I know we're doing what we can on the Hill, dealing with dead and dying trees currently as we're building our summer plan and multi-year plan. So yeah, a big supporter of fire prevention education. And then ultimately think that we need to seek alignment with counties on the seasonal needs. As we know, the bulk of our business here comes in the winter for the ski resort operation, and that we have a different demographic in the summer. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So questions for discussion. The February 7th conversation identified that the board would like a 24/7, 365 Amador fire coverage to ensure that there was always a team available that could respond to calls and someone qualified to drive the truck. The current funding for Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department includes annual assessment, property taxes, and nonprofit donations. How can this be considered with a different amount from the 218, which Doug and Rick alluded to and Doug and I've talked about? To challenge some assumptions from the KMPUD and KVFD presentation, I think we need to question the need to transition from a volunteer base to a fully paid staff to continue services. Some remaining questions. What is the demand difference in winter versus summer? As I've said previously in the board meeting, I feel that we're pretty self-contained in our operations for emergency medical services with the Barton Ski Clinic and our ski patrol on the Hill, not unnecessarily breaking down the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. We do have obstacles to getting the volunteer firefighters and recruiting, and I think there's an opportunity for partnership here moving forward. I appreciate the call out of Alpine, Amador, and El Dorado counties, particularly Lake Valley Fire Department, our closest responding agency. And I think we need to dig deeper into a no response for inquiry and staffing and supporting our community and EMS fire needs. Can the assessment calculations and the work done be maintained but adjusted to the price that the survey indicated? Would that be acceptable for the community? Let's go to my last slide, please, and our asks. So to wrap all this up, we have a couple asks of the board. To start, I recommend we revisit the stance that KMPUD needs to transition from volunteer-based to fully paid staffing to continue services. Perhaps we could look into a solution that blends full-time paid staff with year-round volunteers. I truly believe we need to reconvene the working group to examine potential solutions and identify concrete asks for the 3 counties and empower the working group to speak with the county representatives on the seasonal needs and the questions asked. We need to take a look at the proposed assessment structure and see if we can identify solutions that could be achieved with a more modest increase as suggested by the community survey results. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Eric, for driving.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ricky, for taking the time and providing your perspective here and your thoughts. And I think you brought up some good things to think about. To answer, just a couple of things that came to mind were the summer winter thing. I know that that's something that came up in our last meeting too. There is some information on other people have asked about call volumes and in valley, out valley. We have information on that on the website. Just to answer the seasonality stuff, it's pretty bimodal. It's peaks in summers and winters, and they're about even in those periods. And then October, November is very light comparatively, and also April, May. So there's shoulder seasons as one might expect. But, I know we get questions on call volumes and locations and in valley versus out valley. The majority are in valley, alarms versus EMS. That's on the website as well. So, just to answer that really quickly, I think just in terms of some of the other things you brought up with, related to the TAC, I mean, we can certainly revisit that. The board can discuss that and as an option to do this. But I would just say that we're getting all this information, and I'll talk about this in the roadmap in a few minutes. We're at a starting point in some ways where we got a lot of information over the last year, and we're trying to move deliberately and consultatively with the community, including the resort. We really appreciate your partnership on having these conversations, and we're willing to explore lots of these ideas that you have with you for sure. So we thank you for giving them. I think, Rick, you talked a little bit before about some of the ideas that you have of a paid department paid fire chief versus volunteer, and that challenges that we might have with state requirements. But we can continue to think about that and explore that. But I think that's where that option and why you're seeing us come forward with the more fully paid professionals, because we think that that's honestly what we can do as fiduciaries and risk and to meet the requirements that we have. So that's why we're suggesting that, and we understand that there could be less, but that's not, I think, in our perspective right now, the viable solution. But we can have that conversation, continue to have that conversation. Rick, is there anything else that you want to add in terms of what Ricky presented and mentioned?
No, just to highlight the need. I heard the word robust group of volunteers. And that's a challenge for us. It's always going to be a challenge. And Ricky, who former patroller, I mean, you could probably acknowledge that it takes, like, if you have a CPR in progress or if you have a femur fracture, it doesn't, you need at least 3 people there to properly manage that patient. And this is why the modeling that we've done reflects, a minimum of 3 people or 2 or 3 people who are skilled and qualified to take care of that patient. Hoping that another volunteer shows up like we're doing now, or hoping that the volunteer that does show up knows what they're doing and they just didn't start at the beginning of November, isn't really a good solution for us. And moving forward, it will continue to be a challenge for us to try to maintain volunteer ranks to provide quality service to the community.
Yeah. And Ricky, I'll just say I appreciate working with the counties. I think, like I said, I wasn't here being able to ask those questions because I wasn't a part of the community when these conversations were happening. But I'm asking those questions now, and I think we need to work with our county representatives to have an idea of what more we can help with from our TOT and our property taxes for sure. So agree with all that, and I think some takeaways here that we can come from is how can we potentially bring it to the board to talk about having a temporary advisory committee or a working group in the same way and address some of these things to keep the conversation going, because as I said, we're getting all this information really as of December and January, and so here we are, and it's end of February, and we're trying to move deliberately and thoughtfully through this in a way that this community will get behind and support. And so again, thank you again. And before I let you go, Ricky, I see a question in the Q&A. If you wanted to address that, can you see that, or do you want me to read that to you? Open,
answered, or dismissed?
It says there's one open answer, a Q&A that says it's Ricky's main concern about something. And so I don't know if you want to answer this or not.
Well, I would ask that any questions come with a name. I'd prefer to not answer anonymous questions just out of principle. So if we could establish that as a ground rule moving forward. It's a good question. Like I need to think about it and get back. Yeah, I don't know. We've talked about a moving target for 218 recently and where we could find some common ground and what works best for the community. And that's what I want to anchor back to, right? And I want to go back to the head count and the number, and I want to differentiate between fire and EMS, and the example of a CPR in progress and a broken femur. Yeah, Rick is right. That is, a minimum of 3 people to care for that patient. And I'm an EMT basic. I have been since 1998. In that situation, you assess the scene, you stabilize, and you're calling 911. So you're going to have to get an ambulance for a ground transport, or more severe, you're going to have to land a helicopter for air transport. So again, in the fire model of the 218, you have 3 EMT basics. So you're still not caring for that EMS piece. So I want to make sure that, as we have this conversation, we're differentiating between the two. I know they come as a bit of a package, but, this focus with this process and conversation is around fire.
Right. And I
Correct.
can't agree with that more, Ricky, in that this conversation right here is fire and emergency services related to that. So fire engines going out and helping you if fires happen, chimney fires, 88, we go out there, of course, as we talked about before, and everything inside the community that needs that service. And so, as I mentioned during that FAQ section, we can have a conversation about advanced life support and funding that independently in some ways, because like you said, this is EMT firefighters. This is not paramedics. It's not an ambulance service. And so depending on where things happen here, we can have that conversation as well. And I know that's something that you just mentioned that you're very interested in. So I appreciate that for sure.
Thanks, Doug. And I'm happy to answer Eric Rickert's question. Eric, thanks for using your name. Similarly, as Matt and Tom, like we have a crew of over 20 EMT trained ski patrollers, another 20 outdoor emergency care trained patrollers. I think we just need to figure out a way to make it attractive and interesting to get them to be a part of that robust volunteer program. I think that's the gap currently. So I would love to help facilitate that and bridge that gap.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ricky. And I appreciate everyone using the Q&A feature here. We've been able to answer a ton of questions that way in the last section here, so we can keep the conversation moving. Are there any other? I don't see any other questions in the open section here. Rather than so you take the lead, please. Ricky, there's Eric's comment there is just if you could help take the lead on that. So I will note that for you there. But I don't see any other questions here. So I'll just go ahead and try to wrap up by the top of the hour and appreciate everyone coming out. So Eric, could you maybe move ahead to, oh, sorry, Ricky, there's one more. Administrators regard with fire compliance. Ricky, you're on mute if you're.
Yeah, I know I'm unmuting myself and happy it's working. Bryce, great question. Are any of Vail EMTs, Kirkwood Mountain Resort EMTs, capable of handling some administrative duties with regard to fire compliance? That's a great question. I don't know all of their backgrounds. I know we have some wildland overlap. We don't currently have anyone working in a city or county type fire role. I can dig into that, Bryce, and follow up with you directly, and also share back with Doug and Rick what I better understand of that. I can tell you that through our business, we have some pretty good administrative work and support. So shout out to that crew. And I missed that other question. Sorry.
I think it's all covered. I think you're good.
Okay.
All right.
Doug, John from KPS representing Chuck Cobb would like to speak since he represents one of the biggest voters in the Valley.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, guys. John Ryder. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure.
Great. Yeah, I'm John Ryder. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the development company here in Kirkwood, Master Developer and General Manager of KPS. I'd just like to raise that I think kind of the elephant in the room, and the questions have focused on what can the counties do for us. We pay a really disproportionate share of our property taxes to Alpine and Amador for what I think we all perceive is not a real return on our investment. So as we talk about asking the Kirkwood Valley to fund additional costs related to the fire department, and by the way, developer, Kirkwood Property Services, all in support and have great appreciation for the board and Eric, Rick, of course, and the staff that has spent countless hours trying to come up with a plan that will work here in the Valley to support the appropriate amount of services. But, we really think it's time to reinvigorate the conversation with both counties as to what is the nexus in services between what we are paying in property taxes. I think in Alpine, it's 80% of our property taxes. And it's been brought up. And what do we get for it is a real disconnect, we believe. And why we are asking to continue to support, needed fire services for the amount of things that we contribute to the counties. We feel like that conversation needs to be, totally reinvigorated. What are the counties doing to support Kirkwood? Kirkwood is a massive financial contributor to both of these counties. And, what are they doing to support our effort? What are they doing to support our community and our business plans to make it successful? I don't know that question has been asked directly. And if it has, I don't know that we've gotten direct answers. So I want to be blunt here that we feel that's a major disconnect. And then finally, ask the question, what if the role was reversed here and we asked the rest of, say, Alpine County residents for the next 3 or 4 years to put 80% of their real estate taxes into Kirkwood. And how would they feel about that? Because that's what we're doing now. So with that,
Yeah.
we don't like an added cost. The valley's cost fatigued, and those are my comments.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And I would argue that we've asked the questions that you raised. Can they be asked again? And can they? And if it was, the answers that we get are not the ones that we like. But I don't think that that's any reason not to do exactly what you're saying. And I think that is exactly what we have been doing and will continue to do. And I encourage the community to reach out to your representatives and not just have it coming from myself as the new board president or our board members that have worked with the county supervisors, past and present. Like the community can, reach out to their representatives and voice their concerns over this as well. I don't think this is effective if it's just coming from myself or Rick or Eric or our board. And so I encourage people to do that. So thank you for your comments. I hear loud and clear from everyone in the community. We need to have these conversations with the county. You're not happy with the services that we get back. I agree with you in that, we would like to have more property taxes to fund these things. And I, have been and intend to have those conversations and continue to do that with our community members. But I encourage you all to do this yourselves as well. I really hope you can and take the time to do that. I know we're right at the top of the hour here. I think you answered all the questions and I don't see anything open, Eric. So let's go to the next slide here and talk about what happens next. As I said, the very important thing is at the end there, it's to be determined. Whether we vote on this, there will be a number at some point potentially. We don't know if we'll send this to a vote because if everyone is indicating that this isn't the right path forward, we can just start exploring other options. But we're trying to be diligent and deliberate and having these conversations, here at the end of the process. But at some point, we will have a decision to make. As Rick said, we have a couple of things that are not going to allow the status quo to last forever. Staffing, in particular, having a volunteer fire chief, the training, meeting state requirements are a real challenge, and even the level of support that we're able to provide for you is a challenge. And then financially, even the current model as it exists today cannot last for much longer. I mean, we can make it last for a little bit longer, just with more fundraising and 501c3 perhaps, but we're running in the red right now. We're using 501c3 money to fund our operations, which is usually only for capital expenses. So that's where we are. In the very short term, our next board meeting is on March 7th, and that's where we anticipate having our 218 benefit assessment engineering report, which will go into more detail, answer some of the questions that we got at the February 7th meeting, and other questions that we got today. And then in March, given our general approach today, because again, what we heard from Measure E is that people want to know exactly what they are going to be potentially charged. We want to be able to log into the KMPD website and see what their potential assessment would be, noting that it is, kind of an upper bound as currently planned with the 1.2 from the AFPD proposal, 1.2 million, and what your contribution annually would be for that. And again, the current plan is that this would be a multi-year contract where this would escalate with CPI as Rick had alluded to. So this isn't a startup cost that gets grown and tripled 3 years down the road. That's not the anticipation of what this would be. And so you can log in to see that. And then, we had conversations here about having focus groups and sitting down with people in the community and being able to have more of these conversations and as Ricky suggested, maybe we'll form the temporary advisory committee again to take the lead on something like that perhaps. But that's the goal right now is to have conversations to get your feedback and to understand where you're seeing this and the work we've done to give you some options and try to give you answers to your questions. And we really appreciate the questions that we get. It helps us be better and it helps us think about other things that we're not thinking about. And so I genuinely personally want to say thank you to everyone. I know we have we had about 70 people tonight joining the call, taking the time out of your evening to think about this. And again, this is a potential cost. And as John said, costs and getting company to the community is something that I take very seriously. And I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that that's not something that we don't think about. And so, Eric, can you go to the next slide on contact us? So as Rick said this before, but please reach out to myself and Rick if you have any questions for the KMPUD. we've alluded to previous board meetings. That's how you get to, that's how you get there, and there's a direct link. Also, there's the work that we've done. I alluded to some of the charts and numbers that we have on call volumes and locations, and some of the things like that we collected previously to get more information and other questions that we have. So that's where things are here. Yeah, let's see here, Eric. I see a couple more questions here. Let's see here.
Yes, one thing we will be doing is adding the contact information for the county representatives in
Yep.
Kirkwood, which has been asked twice, and we will get that on our website tomorrow, hopefully.
Excellent. And thanks for that question. All right. I think that's it. Anything? Oh, all right. Anyway, I see some other questions coming in here, and I just really appreciate everyone in the community for taking the time this evening. Ricky, thanks for preparing slides and coming in and voicing your thoughts here. And everyone, thank you again. Please reach out if you have questions or thoughts for us. We're really open to feedback here. Like I said, we're trying to move at an appropriate pace to make the right decision for our community. So with that, I'll wrap things up and say good night. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, everybody.